Okay, so let us continue our proof of Fubini's theorem. Let us recall briefly in the beginning what we have done so far, that is how far we have progressed in the proof. And for that, let's try to recall, well, not try to recall, let's recall what it is that we are proving. So in this theorem, we are given a function, right? A function which looks like this. A real valued function whose domain is the Cartesian product, such that this sum, infinite sum, is absolutely convergent. Then the theorem claims that some equations are true, some equalities are true. There are three equalities. Out of them, the middle one we have already proved in the previous video. And now we are after the first one, and we mentioned in the beginning of the proof itself that the third equality is similar to this one that we are now proving. And in proving the first one, we have already done something. So what is the first one? The first one is this. That this series of the series is convergent and is equal to the value of this infinite sum itself. And we have restricted ourselves actually to the special case. Now in proving this thing, we have already restricted ourselves to this special case where all these functional values are non-negative real numbers for all natural numbers n and m. We are under this restriction now, and in this case, because it's already given that this sum is absolutely convergent, so it will converge to some real number, and we have named that real number L. And the thing that we proved in the previous video, besides proving that middle equality, is this, that this finite sum is less than or equal to L. Why I say finite sum? That's because this X is a finite set. For every finite set X which is a subset of this Cartesian product. Okay, so this is where we stopped in the previous video. Now let's start from here. In particular, so what does this imply? In particular, for each natural number n and also each natural number capital M, we have this thing, summation M equal to 0 to capital M, f of n comma m is equal to, this is of course a finite series, as you can see. Note that in this finite series n is fixed but m is changing from 0 through capital M, through to capital M. Okay, so this finite series can also be written as a finite sum by properties of finite sums as this sum, summation f of n comma m, where n comma m belongs to this set. Well, yeah, I can write like n comma m, because here n is not, although we write n comma m, but really m is the thing that is changing, n is not changing. So I can write like this, n Cartesian product n such that m is less than or equal to m. You can clearly see that this finite series is actually the same thing as this sum, and here we do not say anything about n inside this set. That's because n has been chosen and it is fixed, but m is varying from 0 through m. We do not need to mention separately again that m is greater than or equal to 0, because being a natural number, that is true, m is greater than or equal to 0, but we need to mention that m is less than or equal to capital M. And this thing is then what? This set that you see here is a finite subset of n cross n, for which we already have this inequality. So that means this thing will be less than or equal to L. Okay. Okay, now what can we, how can we use this further? The thing is that this implies and the conclusion comes from proposition 638, that the sum of this infinite series is less than or equal to L for any n belonging to n. Okay, so what have we done here? Let's try to understand that first. Note one thing, that we do not need to worry about small n, because that has been chosen, that is fixed. So let's just forget about it. It's there, it's sitting there, so let it just sit there. But m is changing, and the capital M that we have chosen, because it's a natural number, but we haven't said that it's something very special or some specific natural number. It's actually just any natural number. For any such capital M, this finite sum we have shown is less than or equal to L. Okay, now if you look at this, so this will be an explanation, so let me put it a little separately. You can make it a part of the proof, or you can choose to just not write it. Now you look at this series that about which we have concluded something here. It's an infinite series. Okay, where this n is again that n fixed. Now what is the sequence of partial sums of this series? It is just simply this summation f of n comma m, where m varies from 0 to capital M, and this is just one term in the sequence, and m itself varies over the set of natural numbers. So this is the sequence of partial sums of this infinite series. And if you look at this sequence and also keep in mind that all the terms, these terms in this finite series, each finite series are non-negative real numbers. So the more and more terms you consider in this sequence, the more and more f of n comma m you have to add to get those terms. So that means this is a monotone increasing sequence of real numbers, and these inequalities, I say these inequalities because capital M can change, like it is changing here in this sequence. These inequalities tell me that this is a monotone sequence, monotone increasing sequence that is bounded above by capital L. So by proposition 638, it will be convergent, and it will converge to some real number, and that real number, by the definition of convergence of infinite series, is the sum of this infinite series. One more thing that we know is that that sum will be less than or equal to this upper bound, and in fact that sum actually will be the least upper bound of this sequence, the supremum. Okay, so that's how we get this conclusion. And note one thing, that it is true for n, and n is any arbitrarily chosen natural number, so it will be true for any n actually. So that's why we have written this for any n belonging to n. Okay. Now we are going to consider something else which has this as a as a part. Okay, now fix again some natural number capital N, and consider the following expression, and that expression is this. Is there anything wrong with this expression? The only thing that can go wrong, or rather I should say unusable or useless, is when infinite series are involved and they are not convergent. I mean, in the usual cases that we deal with series, we want infinite series to be convergent. So what we have done here is that for each natural number, actually we have fixed n, so it is some natural number. So we are now looking at a finite series whose terms are infinite series, and in that, how do we see that we are getting different terms in this finite series, I mean the outer finite series, by changing this n? But we have already proved here that each such infinite series is convergent regardless of the value of n. It can be any n. So in this finite sum, actually these are real numbers. So there is no problem. This expression gives us a well-defined finite sum. And we can mention that, note that in the above finite series, each infinite series is convergent. So we can consider such an expression. Now what are we going to do with it? That's the question. And that thing is this. Now consider the set consider the set X to be the set of all such ordered pairs of natural numbers where n is less than or equal to n and m is less than or equal to capital M. We understand what this n is. This n is this n. But what is this m? This is some natural number where some natural number. So just like we have fixed n, which can be any natural number, this m is also any natural number. By now what we are going to do, we are going to consider a finite series of a finite series. In our actual here what we are proving, we have to show that infinite series of infinite series has the same sum as the infinite sum, which is capital L. But now we are going to consider a finite series of a finite series, and here we will use Fubini's theorem, which we have already come across but for finite series. And the reference number is this: by corollary 7.1.14. This is Fubini's theorem for finite series, which we already have seen and also proved. This is the finite series of the finite series that I was talking about. where n varies from 0 to n and m varies from 0 to m. F of n comma m. This by Fubini's theorem for finite series is equal to this finite sum, where this belongs to x. I mean this varies over x. Why? Because you can see that as you vary small n and small m, like this and this, independent of each other, then actually you are just simply varying the ordered pair n comma m over this set. Conversely, if you are varying this ordered pair over this set, where due to the nature of ordered pairs where the coordinates are independent of each other, n varies from 0 to n and m varies from 0 to n. Okay, so we have got this. Okay, but now again you see that this x is what? This x is after all a finite subset of n Cartesian product n. So by what we already proved in the previous video, this will be less than or equal to L. I can write that here itself. Okay. Now what we are going to do, now we will take limits on both sides of this inequality as capital M approaches infinity. Can I do that? I can do that because capital M is some natural number, means it is any natural number. So this inequality actually is it represents infinitely many inequalities, where in place of m you can take any natural number. So for each natural number m you have one such inequality. Forget about n, that is for each n also. If you vary n also, then you will get even more. For each capital N, such an inequality is there for every capital M. That's what I was trying to say. The next line will look somewhat casual, but I will explain everything. Now, taking limit as m approaches infinity, we get, okay, so at once I will write this summation n equal to 0 to n summation n equal to 0 to infinity The question is how? What is the justification for this? And how exactly do we get this inequality from here? And by the way, what do we really mean when we say now taking limit as m approaches infinity? In fact, when you write such a sentence, you actually even write notations like this: limit, below that m tends to infinity, then you write this, then in the very next line you write this. Okay, so what is going on? You see, you again you consider this sequence. You consider this infinite sequence, okay, where m is changing. N is any natural number. For any natural number n, we can consider this sequence by varying m. We can do that. Is this a convergent sequence? That is a question, because otherwise how can we take limit? It is a convergent sequence. Why? The reason is that we have already proved that regardless of the value of small n, this series is convergent. And in fact, the sum is less than or equal to capital L. That information also we have. And the sequence of partial sums of this series has this term as its general term, where when you vary m, capital M, you get terms. So what we are looking at in this sequence, in the general term of this sequence, is a finite series of such sequence terms, each one of which is convergent. Note very carefully that in this outer sum we have, say, n, capital N plus 1 terms, from 0 to n plus 1 terms. Each such finite series is coming from a different sequence, from a different series. Why? Because the small n is changing. But because irrespective of the value of n, all such series are convergent, so we are looking at the terms of many sequences of partial sums of many such series. In fact, we are looking at the sum of the, what can I say? For each such series, let me show the variation also. Say you are considering this infinite series for precisely these values of n, 1 and so on, n. So for each one of them, you get a sequence of partial sum. You can take the sum of those sequences of partial sums. It is that sum, this sequence. Because when you take the sum of those sequences of partial sums, you are going to get a sequence. It is that sequence. And each sequence of partial sums is convergent, converges to something that is less than or equal to L. So this sum is also convergent because it's a sum of convergent sequences. So from limit theorems on sequences, the sum is also a convergent sequence. So that's why this sequence is convergent, and here we can take the limit as m approaches infinity. So we can take the limit, but what happens after we take the limit? That is another question. And after taking the limit, we of course have this infinity here, because each such sequence of partial sums converges to this, which represents the sum of this infinite series itself, which we write like this itself. The same symbol for the series, it represents the series as well as its sum. Fine. But how is the inequality maintained? That's because when you have, it is also one of the properties of limits of sequences. Say you have a convergent sequence like this, where n is the variable and all the terms are less than or equal to some real number L. Then you take limit and say its limit is small l, then small l is also going to be less than or equal to L. And this is a consequence of the comparison principle for limits of sequences. You go back to that thing, comparison principle, which tells us that if two sequences are comparable term wise like this, one of them in this case is the constant sequence L, 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 then their limits also maintain that inequality. That's why we have this. Okay. And now once more, note that all of these things are happening for this n, which itself is was arbitrarily chosen back there. So we can now vary this n also. So what will that tell me? Since, so we continue like this, since the above inequality is true for any natural number n, we similarly have okay, should I write we similarly have? Let me just think. Well, not exactly similar. Okay, we have by again proposition, was it proposition 638 or theorem? Proposition, we have by next this. Again, how? And suddenly again proposition 638 is making an appearance. Now let's see. So this conclusion is not exactly like this conclusion that we obtained from that one, which was here, which involved only finite series. The difference is that for these inner series we already knew beforehand that they are convergent. We showed that before doing this calculation. Here, however, we do not really know whether this outer series, that means this series, is convergent or not. That's what we are showing now. So it is not that we are just simply taking limit on both sides. That's not the case here. So if you want to, so what we have done here is that we have concluded that this outer series, that means this entire series whose terms themselves are series, is convergent and also its sum is less than or equal to L. So where does that convergence come from? That again comes from proposition 638. How? Again, let's look at the sequence of partial sums of this entire series. And that sequence looks like this. Okay. Now What about the original, I mean the inner series? The absolute inner object, I mean the functional values, only the fn comma m's, they are non-negative. We are still under that restriction. So they give rise to a series of non-negative terms whose sequence of partial sums, because of this non-negativity, becomes a monotone increasing sequence. But one more thing is that each term in the sequence of partial sums of any such series is itself a non-negative real number, and the sequence increases like that. It's monotone increasing and it's bounded above, from above by capital L. So it goes like that and reaches its supremum, that is the limit, that is the sum of this inner series. Definitely that is also going to be a non-negative real number. Okay. So that means this outer series that you are looking at is again a series whose terms are non-negative real numbers. So when we look at the sequence of partial sums of this outer series, that is this sequence, we are again looking at one such sequence, that is monotone increasing, simply because the terms themselves are not again non-negative real numbers, these series terms, inner series terms. So it is monotone increasing sequence, and this sequence is bounded from above by L again. That's what we have here, we see here. And we can say so because this inequality is true for any n belonging to n, so we can vary n. So that way we have a sequence that is monotone increasing and bounded from above by L, so it will be convergent, and that convergence comes from theorem 638. Converge to what? Converge to its supremum, least upper bound, which will itself be less than or equal to L, and that supremum is this. So that's how we not only have convergence, but also at the same time the fact that the least upper bound is less than or equal to this sum upper bound. Okay, so that's how we have this fact about our original series of series that we have in the actual statement of Fubini's theorem. So what we have done so far is that what we wanted to show, we want to show that this is actually equal to L. We have so far managed to show that this is less than or equal to L. Now we will show the opposite, that this is greater than or equal to L. Okay, let's now go for that. But that we will not do directly, we will do it a little indirectly. Okay, so next, and by indirectly I mean this, or rather tau means this. Now we will prove this. This is greater than or equal to L minus epsilon for all real numbers epsilon greater than 0. That will automatically imply that this thing is greater than or equal to L. Exactly how we are coming to that later. First, let us establish this. Okay, let's see how we can proceed. So, we arbitrarily choose any positive real number epsilon and keep in mind that still the only hypothesis we have is that that entire sum, infinite sum, where the variable n comma m, that ordered pair varies over the entire Cartesian product n cross n, that sum is convergent, absolutely convergent, and its sum is capital L. That is the only thing we have. So let's again go back to that fact. Since L is equal to, I won't be able to write it here. Since L is equal to so by the very definition of such an absolutely convergent sum, there exists a bijection G from n to n cross n such that that sum can be written as an ordinary infinite series with the help of G, or there exists a G which gives this sum its meaning. Such that L is equal to, now when we apply this G, in order to change this input in terms of G, we write G of I. So G of I is just this n comma m, and now I varies from 0 to infinity. Okay, so we have actually not done anything much. We have just simply used the definition of absolute convergence of such a sum. So there exists such a bijection, and if I am remembering correctly, we already considered such a bijection previously in the proof. I can't remember, and it does not matter. Since each f of g of I is non-negative, never forget what your assumptions or hypotheses are. We are still under that non-negativity spell. Okay, so we have that the sequence of partial sums of this series, because now this is an ordinary infinite series, that is this sequence. I equal to 0 to say n. will it conflict with anything else? No, okay, let us take K. This sequence is a monotone bounded sequence. Again, see that monotone bounded sequence, that thing keeps coming. Or oh, I cannot say bounded sequence, but monotone sequence. Monotone sequence or monotone, I should mention that it's increasing. If you say simply monotone sequence, it may either be an increasing sequence or decreasing sequence. Monotone increasing sequence. Non-negativity of these terms made this sequence monotone increasing, but we already know that this sequence is convergent because if the sum of the series is L, so that means it should be bounded above. And by again proposition 638, this limit, which is actually the limit of this sequence, must be its least upper bound, supremum, because that is the theory, that is the theorem. So by proposition 638, L is the supremum of the above sequence. Above sequence means this sequence. L is the supremum, that means it's the least upper bound. Now if we go even less than L, then the upper bound property will be lost. And that means if we consider L minus epsilon, which is obviously less than L because epsilon is positive, hence L minus epsilon is not an upper bound because it is now less than the least upper bound. Of the above sequence, of this sequence. That means there will be at least one term in this sequence which will which will show that it's not an upper bound. It will exceed L minus epsilon. It will be strictly greater than L minus epsilon. So we write that like this. So there exists some natural number, say n prime, such that the corresponding term in this sequence, summation f of g of I, where I varies from 0 to n prime, is strictly greater than L minus epsilon. So this inequality prevents L minus epsilon from being an upper bound of this sequence. But now what is the consequence of such an inequality? Now we are going to, I think, consider, we are going to write this finite series as a finite sum. So here I need to refer to the actual results that are going to be used. Okay, so here I go by proposition 7111D. You see these statements, you will understand what we are talking about. This series is equal to a finite sum f of g of I, where we need to mention what the set Z is, where Z or Z is this set. It's just the GIs. That means all the natural numbers n such that n is I is less than or equal to n prime. It's just that. But why did we have to write it like a finite sum? That's because of this and by proposition again 7111, but this time part C. This thing itself, this sum, is itself again another such finite sum which looks like this. Summation again we bring back n comma n, where this belongs to x, where now we need to say what x is. Don't know, you may have seen, or you can clearly see that we are using again and again the same name x for many different sets, but whatever x's we have already come across previously, their stories were over there itself. If you want, if you feel like it may create confusion, then you can use some other names also. If you run out of English letters, you can always use Greek letters or some other symbols, where x is, now you can clearly see what x will be. X will be the set of all the GIs that we have here. I need to mention that here I starts from 0. Here I did not have any need to mention because I is natural number, that was given, but here I need to mention and ends at n prime. Here also you go back to this part C of this proposition and you will realize how one you just can see clearly if you see it somewhat casually why this is so, but still if you have to be absolutely rigorous about everything to the point of obsession, then you can go back to this proposition and see exactly what goes on in having this equality. Okay, so now we have this finite series is equal to this finite sum. And we have what was it that we concluded about this finite series, that this is strictly greater than L minus epsilon. So that means this is greater than L minus epsilon. Hence this is greater than L minus epsilon. Okay. Now we are going to claim something about the set X itself. Since are you confused about g of I being in this Cartesian product? Do not forget that g is a function from n to n cross n. So g of anything, any natural number, is going to be an ordered pair. Since X is a finite set, it will be a subset of a set of the form Y less than or equal to what? Yeah, I became distracted. N is less than or equal to, say, n, and m is less than or equal to m. And again I am repeating, this capital N and this capital M have nothing to do with those previous N and M. Okay, those things are already over. But the question is why? This part is left out by the author, and I will also leave it out to you with a hint. Let me see if you can prove this. So we have made a statement here, no? Any such x means our x is a specific x here. That x, because it's a finite set and is a set like this, it will be a subset of some such y. For, I need to complete it, for some natural numbers n and m. And my hint is, prove this by actually it's not my hint, it's Professor Tao's hint, but my addition to this hint is this: prove by induction. So this is what professor says, but what extra I say is this: on the cardinality of x. Okay, so this you have to do. Have to do means try at least. So then what do we get? Hence, summation n varying from 0 to n, summation m varying from 0 to m, f of n comma m, which is equal to summation n comma m varying over y. And this step is again, of course, by Fubini's theorem for finite series. What is the corollary? 7.1.14. Okay. Now, because x is a subset of y and over y we have written a finite sum. So if I restrict my variable n comma m in particular over x, that means I am possibly losing some terms. And what is the nature of these terms? They are all non-negative real numbers. So I will have this inequality. If in place of y I write x, and this, all of this is happening again due to the fact that we are sticking with non-negativity. Or if you go in the other direction, in going from this sum to this sum, you are possibly including some terms. I say possibly because it may happen that x is actually equal to y, or x may be a proper subset of y. If x is a proper subset of y, then in going from this one to this one, you are actually adding some extra terms. But even then, those extra values may actually be 0, or they may be positive. That's why we have this inequality. And already this thing is strictly greater than L minus epsilon. Okay. Now I think you can already guess what we have to do next. Again, taking limit as m tends to infinity. Let's write. Now, taking limit as m tends to infinity, we get it seems the more I write, the worse my handwriting gets. We get this. You now understand what has happened here. We have already gone through one such argument. There we had the opposite inequality, and in place of L minus epsilon, there we had L. And now we know why this thing happens. Again, we are using that fact that we are considering the sum of finitely many sequences of partial sums of some series, all of which are convergent. So their sum is also convergent, and the limit is this. If you let m increase without any bounds. But now, unlike the previous case, now for n also we can take limit on both sides. Why? Because we know that the double series that we have been dealing with so far, now that has been proved to be convergent. Previously we did not have that. So there we had to use proposition 368 or whatever the hell it was. So now again taking limit as n approaches infinity, we get that is, now we know that the outer series is also convergent. And we wanted to show this, but there is a very minute details which one would almost overlook, is suddenly this strict inequality has become ordinary inequality. Is it just simply a sloppy writing, or is there any reason behind this? Yes, actually when we take limit and we have inequality like this, we use the comparison principle for limits of sequences of real numbers. And if you go to comparison principle, you will see that we do not have any strict inequality there. We have only ordinary inequality. Let me give you one example. You already know that the sequence 1 over n, where n is a positive natural number, is a convergent sequence. And you also know that all the terms of this sequence are strictly greater than 0. But what happens when you take limit? You get 0. So you have to write 0 greater than or equal to 0. You do not write 0 greater than 0. This is a true statement, but this is not a true statement. Okay, so to allow for such possibilities, we can, at best what we can do is we write ordinary inequality. It has nothing to do with what is going on, but still I wanted to draw your attention to that. Okay. Now this thing is greater than or equal to L minus epsilon, but for every epsilon. That is the point. So we write next, since epsilon greater than 0 is arbitrary, so this proves that this double series or series of series should actually itself be greater than or equal to L itself, because if it is strictly less than L, then you will get a contradiction, and such a situation has already occurred before, so I am not going into the details of how one gets the contradiction. Since this is arbitrary, I am just simply going to write we have this. The other, what I was saying here just now, is that if you suppose that this is strictly less than L, then you can combine that with these statements to get a contradiction, and such situations have already occurred before. Okay, so we now have this. So combine this with the other inequality that you proved, that this is less than or equal to L, and we get equality. That was our contention. That's what we wanted to prove. So it seems like we have completed the proof of the first equality, but do not forget that we are still under that restriction that these fn comma m are non-negative real numbers. But in general that is not necessary. Even if the signs change, signs of these functional values change, still you can have an absolutely convergent sum like what we have here. So that general case has to be dealt with next, which we will do in the next video. So today we have in fact covered a significant portion of the proof. So the general sign case where the terms can have any signs whatsoever, that will be handled later. And here I end the video for tonight. Our next upload is this coming Tuesday, and we have once again gone through field theory now. So Tuesday let's do vector spaces, and then we will deal with calculus. So that's just it. So see you on Tuesday with vector spaces. Until then, this is me, Lucifer, from a mathematical room. Have a nice night.